Have you ever just paused? Really taken a moment to step back and observe your own mind at work? To actually watch yourself perceiving reality? Consciousness is, without a doubt, the most profound and perplexing mystery of our very existence. It is the silent witness behind literally every single thought you have, every emotion you feel, and every sensation you've ever experienced. Today, we are going to dive deep into this incredibly vast topic. We're going to bring together two worlds of knowledge that might seem entirely different at first glance. On one side, we have the ancient, profound, and timeless wisdom of Indian knowledge systems, and on the other, a highly structured, modern educational framework you might have heard of, known as Bloom's Taxonomy. Think of this as an inward journey to map out the very architecture of our own self-awareness. So let's dive into this extraordinary exploration of the mind. Welcome to the second video in the series of Human Consciousness in the Context of Indian Knowledge Systems and Modern Sciences, titled Human Consciousness as per Bloom's Taxonomy. We are absolutely thrilled that you are continuing with us on this deep philosophical journey. Think of today's agenda as a sort of mountain ascent. We're going to start at the base camp and climb all the way to the peak. We'll begin with our welcome to human consciousness, then move into memory and comprehending reality. From there, we'll look at applying awareness through practice, analyzing the individual and cosmic, evaluating theories and liberation, and finally, reaching the summit with creating unity and samadhi.
Let's start with our first step. Welcome to human consciousness. Our main goal right now is to see how we can map ancient Indian wisdom directly onto modern cognitive science.
The specific framework we're going to use for this mapping is Bloom's taxonomy. Now, traditionally, educators use this taxonomy to classify the learning process into 6 cognitive domains. You start at memory, move up to comprehending, then utilizing or applying, analyzing, evaluating, and finally, at the very top, creating. But what if we took this framework and instead of applying it to learning a school subject, we applied it to the actual experience of consciousness itself? We can view these 6 steps as a hierarchical staircase. And what's absolutely fascinating is that this highly structured, modern scientific framework perfectly parallels the traditional Indian path to higher consciousness. Both systems start at a base level of fundamental recognition and culminate in a transformative synthesis of knowledge. So in this light, Bloom's framework isn't just an educational tool. It's literally a ladder we can use to measure the limitless capacities and spiritual evolution of the human mind.
Moving right along to Section 2, Memory and Comprehending Reality, we have arrived at the foundational base camp of our mountain ascent.
Let's ground ourselves in some definitions. The word for consciousness stems from the ancient Sanskrit root chit, which evolves into chetana in Hindi. Now, chit doesn't just mean the biological state of being awake. It represents a profoundly deep awareness, perception, and consciousness. It is the fundamental mental state that actually facilitates self-awareness. When we say chetana, we're evoking a concept with incredibly deep linguistic and spiritual roots. It points directly to the seer, that silent witness constantly present within us. In Indian philosophy, this isn't just neurons firing in a brain. It is the very essence of life itself, the exact quality that separates the conscious observer from inanimate, unconscious matter. If we tie this concept of chetana to the very first stage of Bloom's taxonomy, which is memory or knowledge retrieval, consciousness at its most fundamental level is defined by the ability to simply recognize yourself and your surroundings. This is your base camp. It includes your internal awareness, meaning you can recognize a thought forming or a fleeting emotion, like suddenly feeling hungry or having an old memory pop into your head. But it also includes external awareness, which is the basic perception of your physical environment, like hearing a sudden noise outside. Before you can ever hope to analyze or evaluate a thought, you absolutely must have the basic memory and capacity to recognize that the thought even exists. This foundational memory is the bedrock of our entire cognitive structure.
Okay, so let's take a step up the staircase. We move from simple memory to the level of comprehension. In this stage, consciousness isn't just about basic awareness anymore. It now includes the ability to actively analyze and contemplate information. At this level, your consciousness allows you to take in sensory stimuli, thoughts, and memories. And this is the crucial part. It interprets them based on your past experiences and accumulated knowledge. For example, when you look at a tree, you aren't just seeing a shape or a patch of green. Because of your prior knowledge and the impressions stored in your mind, your consciousness actively interprets that visual data, and you comprehend it fully as a tree. It's these past impressions that shape our current understanding, allowing us to make actual sense of reality.
Now, this brings us to a really fascinating fork in the road regarding how we view comprehension. On one side, we have the purely physical or psychological view. This perspective sees comprehension simply as brain function, a psychological state where neurons fire to match past data with current stimuli. It's viewed as a mechanical, biological process. But when we look at the Indian metaphysical perspective, Chaitanya means something vastly more expansive. In Indian philosophy, consciousness is seen as a deeply spiritual and metaphysical concept. It isn't just an isolated psychological event happening inside a single skull. It's an integral part of a universal awareness that goes way, way beyond the individual ego. It's the inner realization that connects us to a much larger universal fabric.
This takes us to Section 3, applying awareness through practice. In Bloom's terms, we are entering the application domain.
So what happens when theory meets the real world? At this stage, consciousness translates into practical, real-world application. It becomes the guiding force in how we navigate our lives. Think about how we solve complex problems or make value-based decisions. When you're faced with a tough moral dilemma, say, deciding between telling a lie for personal convenience or choosing the harder path of truth, it is your applied consciousness that allows you to pause, reflect on your deepest values, and evaluate the potential consequences of your actions. It gives you the power of self-regulation. You're no longer just running on autopilot, reacting to stimuli. You are actively utilizing your awareness to direct your behavior and choices in the physical world.
Within Indian traditions, this practical application takes on an even deeper dimension through yogic practices. Chaitanya is actively harnessed and cultivated through ancient methods like mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. It's important to understand that these aren't just physical exercises or stretching routines. They are literal applied technologies for the mind. They are designed specifically for the intentional cultivation of advanced awareness. By engaging in a regular, disciplined meditation practice, a person systematically elevates themselves. They move from that baseline state of self-awareness we talked about earlier, and they begin to orient themselves toward much higher, more expansive states of consciousness. It is essentially an experimental science for the soul.
Moving up to Section 4, Analyzing Individual and Cosmic. This aligns with the analyzing domain of Bloom's taxonomy.
To truly understand consciousness, we have to deconstruct it. We have to take it apart and see how it works. Both modern neuroscientists and ancient philosophers analyze consciousness by breaking it down into its core components, things like attention, perception, and thought. In Indian knowledge systems, the subjective experience of consciousness is meticulously categorized into states: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Meanwhile, modern science measures it across different levels, breaking it into the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind. Our everyday subjective experience is really just a complex, ongoing interplay between all these layered components, constantly analyzing the reality around us.
But here is where the Indian analysis takes a massive leap. When Indian knowledge systems analyze Chaitanya, the deconstruction doesn't stop at biology. The analysis draws a clear, profound distinction between individual consciousness, our personal limited everyday experiences, and cosmic consciousness. Cosmic consciousness is the awareness that links an individual to the entire vast universe. This brings us to a foundational concept in Vedanta, the relationship between Atman, which is the individual self, and Brahman, the universal consciousness. Vedanta beautifully explains that despite appearing different on the surface, Atman and Brahman are ultimately one united entity. It's exactly like a single drop of water and the vast ocean. Fundamentally, they are made of the exact same essence. The entire cosmos resides within the individual.
Let's step up to Section 5, Evaluating Theories and Liberation. We are nearing the summit.
In the evaluating stage, we critically look at the different theories that try to explain our existence. In Western philosophy, we often encounter Descartes' dualism, which argues that the mind and the physical body are two completely separate, distinct entities. Contrast that with the dominant view in contemporary neuroscience, modern monism, or physicalism. This modern scientific view generally evaluates consciousness as a direct, biological product of brain activity, meaning the mind and body are just parts of one purely physical system. These are two completely different ways of evaluating the raw data of human existence and awareness.
Now, the Indian context evaluates the concept of Chaitanya with a completely different end goal in mind. Instead of just searching for anatomical understanding or philosophical categorization, consciousness is evaluated strictly by its contribution to self-realization and moksha, which means ultimate liberation. Through deep introspection and continuous meditation, an individual evaluates their current state of consciousness, identifies their mental limitations and attachments, and actively strives for higher, unburdened levels of awareness. This unburdened state is where the mind becomes entirely free from worldly attachments, desires, and aversions. The ultimate goal of this evaluation isn't just to gather data, it's the eternal freedom of the soul.
And finally, we reach the peak of our mountain in Section 6, creating unity and samadhi.
In modern scientific research, the creating stage, the very top of Bloom's taxonomy, often involves synthesizing knowledge from philosophy, cognitive science, and neuroscience to develop models of artificial or machine consciousness. Science is essentially trying to construct or create awareness from the ground up. Parallel to this, but heading in a radically different direction, yogic traditions seek to create or cultivate entirely new levels of self-awareness and spiritual evolution. Using Bloom's highest framework, the ultimate creation in this traditional context isn't a machine, it's the realization of complete unity between the self and the universe. This supreme realization, the ultimate synthesis of everything we've discussed today, culminates in enlightenment. In the Indian tradition, this peak state is called samadhi. Which brings us to a really profound, provocative crossroads. Given the rapid pace at which modern science is synthesizing artificial intelligence and replicating human cognition, we have to ask ourselves a serious question. If machines can perfectly replicate cognition and problem-solving, can an AI ever truly experience Chaitanya? Can an artificially created mind ever achieve the spiritual unity of samadhi? It's a point that really forces us to meditate on the absolute limits of physical creation versus the boundless, infinite possibilities of the human spiritual evolution. As we wrap up today's explainer, I want you to leave with this final thought. Can that divine spark of true consciousness ever be manufactured in a lab, or is it uniquely, exclusively the signature of the human soul? If this deep dive into the architecture of the mind has sparked your curiosity and given you something to think about, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel so we can continue this incredible journey of learning together.